So, two things I would like you to remember during this talk. Number one is that biology is digital, and that's very pertinent, very relevant to this group. Biology is made of a code, a DNA code of 4 letters. And how can we actually engage with that digitality is interesting to me. The second thing is, I think as a human species, we need to become a lot more humble, and I think we have a lot to learn from things like a mushroom. And that will become clear when I start. My name is Carole Collet. I'm a professor at University of the Arts, Central St. Martin's in London. And I'm interested in designing with and for living systems. The reason I'm interested in this is actually in reaction to designing killing systems, which is what most designers are currently trained to do. If you look at our economic model, and it was great to hear a talk this morning about a few talks mentioning regenerative design. But as designers, I'm a textile designer by training, we are educated to engage in a linear system of production which harvested materials from the planet in usually a toxic fashion. Those materials are transformed, processed, used, and dumped. Our agricultural system, our industrial system are actually all designed around that notion that it's okay to destroy, impact, and kill living species around us. I started looking into sustainability when I did my master's degree actually at Central St. Martin's in 1991. I wanted to see whether I could reconcile being an ecologist and being a designer. And I haven't looked back since. But what happened is I was looking at methods to optimize, methods to reduce toxic pollution, looking at circular systems. But I came across an incredible man called Sir John Sulston, who was a Nobel laureate. He sadly passed last year. And via another project I won't discuss today, but John introduced me to real-life principles that we find in biology. That was in 2007. And as of 2007, I haven't looked back. I just thought, okay, well, the answers in terms of our sustainable crisis is in biology. That's why I'm interested in living systems. We talk a lot about the 4.0 industrial revolution, but I think 1.0 is a far more relevant number. It's the number of planets we have at our disposal to live as a citizen and to actually do design research, if that's what we do. But currently, as a world population, we are using 1.7 planets. So we are over-consuming resources that do not have time to regenerate themselves. We have seen in my lifetime a 60% fall in wildlife population. Each of us are part of this. We have 11 years left to meet the targets and goals set up by the UN Sustainable Development Goals. 17 very critical goals that all countries that have signed up to the UNED have promised to deliver on. We are part of that promise. This will not cheer you up this morning, by the way. But in the past few months, there's been some very critical, radical reports coming out from a wide range of scientists and scientific organizations. The IPCC, 4 months ago, made it very clear we have now 11 years left to stay below the 1.50 Celsius increase in global temperature. Currently, we're heading for 3 degrees. We have critically endangered plants and animals, but we also have endangered elements on our periodic table, which all of us are using a lot, particularly in anything that is called smart, using a lot of rare earths. This is the industry I relate to, the industry I was trained to design for and with. The textile industry is catastrophic in terms of environmental degradation. And as a designer, I don't want to be part of that. I want to be part of how can we restore and create a new type of textile industry that is much more regenerative. And I'm interested in looking at what can we learn from living systems to rethink how we make and manufacture materials and product. So I set up the Design and Living Systems Lab at Central St. Martin's about 6 years ago now. And the idea is to really look at researching, referencing, and modes of fabrication found in nature so that we can incorporate biological principles, i.e. cyclic, solar, and local processes into the design process and the manufacturing process. I'm interested in exploring live conducive principles inherent to biological systems so that we can navigate the realm of the handmade, the man-made, and what I call the grow-made as an inquiry into future making. How do we transition from the traditional, conventional ways of making to the grow-made, and how do we shift from manufacturing to biofactoring? To go back to my first point, biology is digital. Here are sort of three different ways to think about it. If you look at one of my favorite mushroom, this is a natural mushroom. This is not something that, it's not a Photoshop or it's not reprogrammed. It's got various nicknames, but one of them is sort of lady lace. This is produced thanks to a set of code, which is a DNA code, a biological code. The way we make a lace in the middle, so this is a lace I made in collaboration with an industrialist in Japan, is very power hungry. And it's currently led by a binary code. Could we shift to combining the biological digital code with a binary code to start looking into reprogramming natural system that could be tuned to actually help develop better means of fabrication for us? This raises ethical questions too, so these are questions we need to ask. But I want to reference this particular chart. You might be familiar. How many of you are familiar with this? Great, that's good. I think quite a critical reference, and I'll explain briefly for those who don't know this. So this is from Julian Vincent, a sort of world leader in biomimicry and biomimetic engineering, used to work at Bath University. And if you look at, this is comparing two systems. On the left is a technology system. So if you think of, I'm trying to sort of, it's going to be a bit cliche because we don't have long, but if you think of, how do we create a building? How do we make a building? And on the right is how biology works. So how would a tree make a tree? You can see the real difference is the way we make and manufacture uses a huge amount of energy and matter. A biological system uses a huge amount of information in the form of DNA, a lot less matter, but a lot more time, and that information is dedicated to developing structure. I'm interested in shifting from that way of making to this way of making, and it's not easy. And when I started looking into this, I was thinking, well, how does that work? I mean, how do I relate to designing with the living? This is not how I've been trained as a designer. And I wanted to really develop a framework that would help me understand the different options. So this is a conceptual framework I developed for an exhibition I curated at the EDF Foundation back in 2013, and a few of you were exhibiting in that exhibition. Yes, here you are. And this, so if you forget the top line, which this was the sort of the five sort of sections of the exhibition. But, looking at nature as a model, so this is really looking at biomimicry, nature as a co-worker, how can we collaborate with a living system, like a bee, like a bacteria, to create materials? How can we go into hacking, reprogramming nature, but how can we hybridize nature with bio-nanotechnologies? Or how can we go into developing an imaginary of these new technologies through a more conceptualized nature using speculative and critical design tools? A simpler version of this is looking at nature as a model, as a co-worker, as a hackable, tunable system. And this is some of the references I use when I develop my work. We don't have long, so today really 10 minutes. We can only use it as a teaser for conversation. I'm going to talk about two projects. One is a curiosity-driven project. So Botanical Fur is not about looking at applied textile methodology, but really looking at understanding natural systems. And I'll show a few little bits of some more recent work on the mycelium textiles project. The key question that drives me is, how does nature make a textile-like material? Because nature does it better. But we think we're a very intelligent species. I'm a fairly educated woman. Yet, when I look at how a tree makes matter, I need to be more humble, because it knows how to make matter at ambient temperature without creating anything toxic for its own survival. On the contrary, creating a whole ecosystem of nutrients that benefits other species. So this is one of my favorite material. This is a fabric made by a tree. It's from the Lagetta, I love the name as well, Lagetta laghetto tree, grows in Jamaica. It's a type of lace bark, so actually it's under the bark. If you actually peel the bark, you've got a sort of white mesh, and if you peel that mesh, you get a fabric-like material. When I first saw this, I said, well, this looks like a woven cloth. I mean, if I hadn't said this to you, you would think this is a fabric grown at ambient temperature without creating any toxic nutrients, using water and sun. We don't know how to do this. Coconut bark, you're more familiar with, another one of my favorite mushroom. This is a close-up on a cactus fur. And so this tells us that in nature, there are sets of DNA codes that exist that program a textile-like materiality. Just DNA coding that programs that lace sort of skirt for the mushroom or that sort of quality of bark. There's a purpose for it, there's a function that's linked to this, but that means there's a digital code that exists. So I'm interested in trying to get closer to that way of making, that biological system. And so Botanical Fur is really curiosity-driven, looking at what can we learn from plants' fur systems and how can I inform new textile fabrication methods. Can we control the architecture of plant roots to grow fur-like fabrics? And I'm interested in looking at the extreme end of plants. I have a fascination for the plant world, but if you really look at plants, they all are covered in trichome or hair, on the stems, on the leaves, on the roots. And the sort of extreme end of the plant, that at the end of that hair is where you have that space for alienation. It's a way to sense an environment. It's a way to protect, in the case of the cactus, it's a way to protect itself from both water and sun, actually. It's hydrophobic. If you look at fur in root system, it's a way to sense nutrients and water, gravity. So that sort of potential interface is a really interesting place. It's a very unexplored place in terms of how we actually make and manufacture. So again, you can see loads of different hairs. This is a microscopic hair of a cactus type. Botanical Fur is a fairly recent project, so it's work in progress. But I quite like to share when it's work in progress because it's quite good to get some critique. So I welcome this probably after the talk now. But I run 3 different experiments in parallel. So first of all, looking at creating miniature furs simply to sort of understand, study, and observe the material characteristics of fur systems produced in nature. I make sense of the world around me through making. So, knowing through making is critical to me. The second strategy is to really look at actually, by collaborating with a plant system and its root systems, can I actually grow textile-like furry patterns? And for this, I'm using tissue culture, plant tissue culture techniques and tropism. And the third one is really moving much more into synthetic biology and really looking into could we actually sort of tune plant systems to grow fur? So briefly, I'll show you some of the recent experiments. So this is a Epostoa nana, which is a cactus that you'll find a lot in Mexico, for instance, which grows this incredible fur-like system. A little bit deviant, because actually you've got some really pretty sharp spikes right underneath that. But it's a way to be sheltered from the sun and from water. I'm careful around it. I don't kill anything that the cactuses I work with, but I sort of carefully shave them. And this is looking at, it took about 9 years to grow that particular cactus, and it's 0.28 grams of materials. So the other thing I'm interested in is looking at the concept of scarcity and abundance. And the rhythms and the pace of biofabrication found in nature are very extremely different, from very, very slow to extremely rapid. And we tend to ignore that. When we look at agricultural system, it's just everything grows at the same pace for the same season. And we need to start to look at that diversity of fabrication rhythm. So this is just looking at what can you do with it. Is it brittle? Is it malleable? Is it, how can you transform it? What kind of qualities does that fur have? Which is very different to an animal fur. So this is some just little experiments looking how you can manipulate it or not. When does it survive? When does it disintegrate? Does it stay hydrophobic once it's actually knitted or woven? So this is a sort of ongoing experiments to really understand, again, the material characteristic of plant fur. Parallel to this, I'm working with geotropic textiles, so really looking at root systems. Some of you may know some of my previous work. I have a fascination for roots. Don't know where that comes from, but they are quite incredible. And if you look at this, is an example of, if you look at C, for instance, so this plant has 5 centimeters of height, but actually 2 meters depth of root systems. So actually there's a lot going on underneath that we don't know that much about, but I find that really interesting. Not so much is done in that field, but actually there's some research around the surface of a plant. So not just the height or the depth of the roots, but the actual surface of the stem, the leaves. And in this case, if you look at the rye plant, it reaches 639 square meters. The surface of its underground root system is estimated to be 130 times greater than its aerial surface. Together, the roots would represent 622 kilometers. They grow 5 kilometers a day. That means there's a really fast biofabrication system happening underground. What could we learn from that? Looking at some of the earliest evidence of root systems found actually in Scotland, 408 million years old. What I'm interested in is actually, looking into the future, is looking back to 400 million years ago. How did that system evolve? I want to redesign a system that's at least 400 million years old, because I think that's where the answers are when it comes to sustainability. So here's my setup, and I don't have time to explain, but actually record the experiments. I try and creating a range by combining different species of plants, looking at, can I create an angle to start with? Can I create loop systems? Can I create a complete mess in this case, a non-woven? Can I create, a whole range of different patterns? Can I create loop? And can I actually conceive that possibly in the future we could look at actually controlling the morphogenesis of root systems to create and grow fabrics in hydroponic systems? I'm looking at current plant tissue culture technique to grow hair and root systems, and actually this one is particularly interesting. This is used in the cosmetic industry. And they found that actually to harvest some of the critical molecules for the cosmetic industries, instead of killing plants, in this case, you just beat the roots a little bit, you shake them a bit. The plant has an auto-responsive system. It will liberate molecules as an auto-defense, and they harvest these molecules, and that's what they use. So they don't need to kill the plants, they just need to keep them alive and shake them a bit to trigger a response. So this is the beginning. There's a lot more going on than I can tell you right now, but again, I'm interested in the slow and fast rhythms of biofabrication. And if you look on the left, so the idea of scarcity and abundance, 14 years to grow 0.3 grams, 14 days to grow this. And we need to learn to adjust, actually, to maybe working with the biodiversity of rhythm. This is what I call it. And then the next level would be to really think about, well, how far can we take this? And could we actually start to grow plants that would grow fur underneath their leaves in this case? So this is part of a speculative future hybrids project. Mushrooms. I love mushrooms. So here we go. Do I have 1 minute? Few seconds left. Okay, right. So, talking about mushrooms, the other project I'll talk about in a few seconds is I like to collaborate with mycelium and not to grow materials. A lot of people work with materials, but my question is, can we use mycelium to replace oil-based finishing in textiles? And I won't explain it, but if you're interested, so it's looking at, powder coating, pleating with mycelium, permanent pleating at ambient temperature, looking into slow-grown embroidery, so looking at ways to pattern cloths to replace current oil-based techniques. This is Tigro, and this is currently on show at La Fabrique du Vivant. I have to talk about this one, because this is when the living takes its revenge. I was trained as a textile designer, and when you train as a textile designer, you have to do a lot of floral design, draw flowers, paint flowers. Didn't like that. And then this is an experiment I did 2 years ago. This is 100% coffee with one culture of mycelium. The mycelium has grown into the coffee, which was compacted, but it hasn't grown in what looks like these flowers. So this mycelium has just done some flowers in my back, which I wasn't trying to do at all. I was trying to test something. This is when it's freshly harvested. You can see the fractal patterns is where the mycelium didn't grow. I have no idea how that happened. I've been trying to replicate that experiment. It's not working. And so this is where there's a real autonomy of living systems, which is particularly interesting as well. And if you look at this, it's sort of like a closed, more fractal, and then there's a much more open one. Again, how did that happen? This is a bit of my headache right now. But if you go to the Centre Pompidou in Paris, there's currently a great exhibition on designing and the living, and you'll see some collections of the work. And then, question for us. This is question time for us. What is our success criteria when you think about the bigger and the larger picture? And I found this recently, which I think I might adopt. I measure my success by how many living things are benefiting from what I'm doing. And I'll let you think about this.